Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. This is a new date and time for us, but we are really excited about our Guru series today. I am very excited. So, welcome to Power Huddle, Inside the Mind of ESG Gurus. I'm Heidi Friedman, a partner and co-chair of Thompson Hine's ESG Collaborative. During this monthly series, if it's your first time joining us, I get to chat with innovative ESG executives. These are unscripted discussions that'll examine how these company executives from various industries are paving the way as ESG trendsetters and championing pragmatic ESG strategies to align with business values while building a sustainable framework to advance their company's ESG goals and practices. Today is amazing, and I want to thank Tanya Nesbitt for connecting us. Averil Edwards is Managing Counsel of Environmental and Sustainability at United Airlines. I'm guessing everybody on this call has flown on a United flight at some point in time. Out of Cleveland, it's my go-to only choice. Thank God for United. Averil advises and represents the airline on environmental and sustainability matters, including United's near-term and 2050 decarbonization strategies, as well as their commitments to sustainable aviation fuel procurement and clean technology investments. She is also a member of the legal department's pro bono and community service committees. She's very involved in her local community, serving as a governor-appointed board member of the Illinois International Port District, near and dear to me, since my husband's a port CEO. We'll have to talk about that another time. A municipal corporation, as secretary on the board of directors of Ladies of Virtue, which is a nonprofit focusing on improving the lives of girls in Chicago, and an associate board member of Cabrini Green Legal Aid. So welcome, Averil. So happy
Thank
to
you.
have you here.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Heidi.
Just a few housekeeping measures. Today's program is being recorded, so you'll be able to view it in our library of recordings on Thompson Hine's YouTube channel. This is intended for general information only of individuals and organizations on matters of current interest. The thoughts and opinions being expressed today are those of the individual panelists and only, and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the panel members' clients, employers, affiliates, or Thompson Hine. The content should not be taken as advice, as the views expressed are for informational purposes only. The question box is open though, so please feel free to put it to my name, Heidi Friedman, and I will do what I can to answer the questions during our half hour together with Averil. So let's get started. Averil, you and I have the same foundation, which is what I love about our connection. We are environmental lawyers at heart. Go dirt lawyers, right? But
Right.
both of us have morphed into the ESG space. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey and where you started and where that path's taken you?
Of course. I'm happy to do that. And so like you said, Heidi, like you, I am an environmental lawyer. And I started practicing in the environmental department of Winston & Strawn, which is a law firm in Chicago, and was there for many years. Doing a variety of work. I did compliance counseling, transactional support for M&A, private equity, renewable energy project finance transactions and other financing transactions, and environmental litigation. And then in 2014, I transitioned in-house to United Airlines, where I took a role as counsel, environmental health and safety. And at that time, my role was focusing on remediation, waste, water, OSHA, so a traditional environmental health and safety practice. And so along the way, I got promoted and my responsibilities expanded to include the entire environmental portfolio. And starting in around 2018 or so, there was additional work around sustainability. United has always kind of led and done a lot of work in this space. but there was more attention to it from a legal perspective. In 2018, we announced our first greenhouse gas emissions reduction commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2050. And there was just a lot more work around the sustainability area. And that, of course, continued through 2019, every year it's just gotten more and more. And so in 2021, 2022, around that time frame, my title changed to environmental and sustainability because of the increasing amount of sustainability work within the portfolio.
That is, first of all, happy 10-year anniversary. So it sounds like you've been there for 10 years. So,
Thank you.
and it, I mean, it sounds like it's, continuing to grow. So hopefully you have some folks to support you now as well. But tell us a little bit more about your current scope of your role at United and what is under your umbrella and what you're responsible for and all of that.
Of course, yes. So currently, my practice focuses still on environmental compliance, so global environmental compliance counseling for the company and representing the company in related matters. So that includes, your traditional Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, RCRA, CERCLA, all of those statutes, as well as the analogous state requirements. And then also international requirements because we fly to a number of locations. And the environmental compliance front does focus a lot on our aircraft maintenance activities. And then global climate change, sustainability, ESG, counseling as well. And this includes the decarbonization strategies and commitments. I referenced the first one. We then subsequently announced a net zero commitment in 2020. And then advising on climate frameworks such as the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, EU emissions trading scheme, other international regulations. There's a lot coming and that has been recently enacted in Europe. And then also the voluntary standards, which just keep proliferating. Frameworks such as Greenhouse Gas Protocol, SBTI, and others that are being developed right now. And then our sustainability disclosures and advertising campaigns, and that obviously includes the ads, social media posts, and our more formal disclosures as well, such as our corporate responsibility report, our SEC filings, and the like. And then I have a commercial aspect to my practice as well, where I advise on the commercial agreements for sustainable aviation fuel, including the purchase agreements and some related environmental attribute agreements, and then environmental and sustainability aspects of other transactions such as leases, acquisitions, financings, investments, etc.
Wow. When do you sleep? That's going to be our next. That is a very broad job, and you and I talked a little bit about this before. Trying to keep up with what is happening within the United States at the state and federal level is hard enough. But once you throw in the global mix, it really is. You could do this all day, every day, and barely stay on top of it. So that is very impressive that you have all of that under your umbrella right now. And I like how you sort of categorize things, because I feel like we're at this huge shift. To me, 2024 is a shift from voluntary to mandatory. And even if it's not mandatory this minute, it's coming and it's out there, and we even know what it might look like. So it's really it's really going to be different for companies. How are you guys preparing? What are you doing to be ready for this shift?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. We're doing a lot of work on, preparing for the upcoming mandates. we have reported for many, many years under the CDP
Hmm.
questionnaire. So we've been in the voluntary kind of climate reporting space for quite some time, and of course, as you indicated, that has evolved over time into more of a mandatory lens. So what we've been doing is kind of taking those existing practices and refining them, continuing to work on them. And for example, a couple of things that we did recently was we introduced TCFD aligned reporting in our corporate responsibility report that was issued last year in 2023. And my understanding is the upcoming SEC rule, of course, we don't know what the final rule will look like yet, but the proposed rule had some elements of the TCFD framework in it. And we also changed our greenhouse gas emission reporting methodology around to capture the full life cycle emissions from jet fuel. And so things like that, making adjustments here and there and really kind of working collaboratively with a number of internal stakeholders to understand the regulations that are coming.
Yeah, the TCFD is a great move. That's definitely sort of going to be, I think, the gold standard going forward in terms of adoptability across regimes here. So you guys are ahead of the mix on that. So other than just the overall quantity and speed at which things are changing, what do you think is the biggest challenge to face in the ESG space right now?
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, my focus is on environmental aspect of it as an environmental lawyer. And I do think that that is one of the biggest challenges. And for United specifically, decarbonization is a huge challenge for the aviation industry, which represents about 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions and is also considered a hard to abate industry because the technological solutions for there's not a technological solution for electric aircraft, long haul electric aircraft currently, for example. So unlike companies that have a very high manufacturing electricity usage footprint, they can go out and buy RECs and um, install solar or wind, whereas we can't necessarily do that with the aircraft that we fly. Um, so that is kind of the biggest challenge for us. And I it's very important to me personally that we all kind of proceed along our decarbonization journeys. Just we're seeing the real impacts of climate
Mhm.
change right now. Last year was the hottest year on record ever. And we're seeing the impacts just in our daily lives. So it is heartening to see, the company taking these steps and other companies as well, and hopefully will achieve success.
Yeah, it was 60 degrees in Cleveland on Christmas. So if
Yeah.
that's not unusual, I don't know what is. I said, clearly we're like the new Charlotte, North Carolina or something. I don't know what's going
Right,
on
right,
here.
yeah.
So, but United has been a leader in this space. I mean, me personally, as having a national practice, travel is just a necessity, unfortunately. And I don't, you certainly don't want a battery on an electric plane running out mid-flight or something. So we're a ways from that. But you guys have really created some programs to be a leader. Can you talk a little bit about what United's done in that space?
Sure, I'm happy to, and thank you for your support for your business. Yes, so we have developed a decarbonization strategy that focuses on reducing our carbon emissions through primarily through sustainable aviation fuel, and
Mm.
then also maximizing the operational and fuel efficiencies And we're also investing in some other lower carbon technologies, such as electric aircraft and hydrogen engines for smaller routes, for shorter routes, like regional aircraft. And so sustainable aviation fuel, if folks aren't familiar with it,
Oh,
it is a alternative to conventional jet fuel. And we're very excited about it because it's available today. It is something that United is purchasing. And so it's the most promising solution that we have right now. It's drop-in ready. It can be used, right now. And although there are still CO2 emissions from SAF on a life cycle basis, so taking into account how the SAF is produced with using renewable materials, which is the feedstock, instead of using fossil fuels, which are drilled from underground, by using the renewable materials like used cooking oil, for example, the carbon emissions from SAF are lower, up to 85% on a life cycle basis compared to conventional jet fuel. And so that's a significant, decrease in greenhouse gas emissions compared to conventional jet fuel. And currently there are, blending mandates in place under FAA regulations where aircraft cannot run on 100% SAF yet due to those regulatory restrictions. But in the future, those we're hoping that those restrictions will go away, which will allow broader adoption. And so we've been a leader in furthering SAF for many years. Starting back in 2009, we actually operated the first US SAF test flight to just, test how it ran in the aircraft. And then in 2016 was a big milestone for United. We were the first airline globally to use SAF in regular operations out of LAX. And then in 2021, we operated the first passenger flight using 100% SAF in one engine, and it flew from Chicago to DC. We also established a couple of very innovative programs in 2021, so including the Eco Skies Alliance and United Airlines Ventures. And we've continued to lead in the subsequent years. In 2022, we purchased SAF internationally from Amsterdam, and we were the first US airline to do that. And in 2023, our UAV launched a sustainable financing collaboration called the Sustainable Flight Fund. And so we've done a lot. We continue, there's still a lot more work to go, but we're very proud, and I'm very proud to work at a company that has taken these steps.
it's great. And learning, it took me a second. I'm like, SAB, but now I got it, sustainable aviation fuel. But so we're all learning good stuff today. But there's a lot there. Obviously, a lot of success. Is there something you can identify as what you think your greatest success is in the ESG space, either you personally or United, depending on how you want to tackle that?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm very proud of the work that the team has done, and our accomplishments as a whole. It takes a large team to do all of this. And so, I work with many colleagues in the legal department, and other groups on these matters, including our corporate transactions team, our SEC regulatory team, and other commercial lawyers, IP. It's really been a very collaborative effort. I will highlight a couple of examples. I think the Eco Skies Alliance that I mentioned is a particular point of pride for me, and I think one of our biggest successes, because and like I said, it launched in 2021. And it was, I believe, the first program where corporate buyers, so corporate buyers of air travel, actually worked with us to finance the green premium of SAF. So SAF is approximately like 3 to 4 times more expensive than conventional jet fuel, and which is one thing that limits, the broader kind of adoption of it. And we worked with a number of our corporate customers to launch this program, and it's just continued ever since and grown over the years, so that as of 2022 there were approximately 40 companies in the
Mhm.
program, and they receive scope 3 emissions reductions that are from their flying or cargo shipments on United, which then fund the green premium for SAF. And that has been a huge success. And then the investments, the other example I would highlight is the ventures uh, fund that I mentioned.
Mhm.
It has just invested in so many different companies that are working on potentially scaling new and exciting low carbon technologies. I'll highlight a couple of them. Savante is one company that it has invested in, and that company is working on potentially using CO2, so captured CO2, as a feedstock to make SAF.
Mm.
um, Another company that's really interesting is Vita Factory, which is a biotech company that is working to commercialize producing SAF through the CO2 and these synthetic microbes. Um, they've invested in Heart Aerospace, which is a company that's developing an electric aircraft, a small electric aircraft, and Zero Avia, which is working on hydrogen fuel cells for regional aircraft engines. And they have also worked on, where we've been able to enter into offtake agreements for future supply of SAF from some of these companies that I mentioned, including some Vita Factory and Dimensional Energy. There was also a joint venture that was formed with UAV and a couple of other companies, where they're working to commercialize SAF technology from ethanol. And
Mhm.
there's a related offtake agreement that was also entered into with that joint venture. So there's a lot of excitement, I think, that I have personally into these different technologies and these possibilities, because I think that we are, obviously very intelligent as species. We have amazing technologies that we're hearing about every day, and I'm sure that we can, solve for any kind of problem, even within the climate space. So it's been really interesting to work on some of these transactions.
Yeah, and congratulations. I mean, first of all, that's a lot of innovation and it's investment, which is really important, I think, right now because there's so much change happening. And by investing in new and creative ways, you guys are helping to drive that. So kudos on all of that. I think as one of the things we talked about as well, we have this gap right now in the US on the federal level in regulation around ESG, right? But we have the states, we have California's new laws, which are coming into effect or in effect, waiting on some guidance. Then we have CSRD on the EU level. So we're kind of being pushed in both directions, driving what's happening here. And, I'm sure the SEC is going to pop up with something soon. What's your view on whether, what's driving, are the states, is the EU, both, who's driving what's going to happen next here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I view personally the EU and California, which is kind of emerged as almost like a dark horse, because first, my personal in tracking these developments we have been, and I've been tracking a lot of the developments coming out of Europe. So CSRD, CSDDD,
Hmm.
which is the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and then the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And then all of a sudden, last year, California passed a number of laws actually that require the reporting of greenhouse gas emissions and require the reporting of climate-related risks. And also, there was another law that was passed regarding requiring reporting related to carbon offsets.
Right.
And those, what's interesting about the California laws is, and actually, I think the same with Europe too. There's a clear desire and intent to loop in and make subject to these laws as many companies as possible. So the California laws apply to public and private companies, whereas what we're anticipating with the proposed the SEC rule, it would not apply to private companies. Um, and with California having such a large economy, it's the fifth largest economy in the world. There are so many companies that do business in California, and that's the threshold for applicability, is like this doing business in California, which my understanding is a fairly low bar to meet.
Very broad.
So yeah, very broad. So, there will be a lot of companies that, will be subject to that. And for a couple of the laws, the California Air Resources Board needs to develop regulations to implement them. So we'll kind of see more details on how they will work. But I do think that those two laws, or the California legislation, will have a significant impact. And then, of course, like I said, the European regulations will have a significant impact as well. They also, I think there was a clear intent to try to loop in and make subject to the laws as many companies as
Hmm.
possible, even companies not listed on European exchanges, but just derive revenue from the European Union member states. So, if those thresholds are met, then the company will be subject to CSRD and CSDDD, and they impose very significant penalties. I think the California laws, I don't think the penalties are necessarily that high, but the EU laws have the potential to impose very significant penalties, like they look at a percentage of the company's global revenue. And so I think that will have a significant impact for that reason.
Yeah, I had to start myself a chart that says, CSRD, California. Actually, I put New York in there because their law is close to passing, the SEC, to try to understand applicability thresholds, what to measure, your GHG emissions using what technology, just to try to have it all in one
Mhm.
spot because there's just so much. And so definitely need to keep our eye on it. One thing I want to make sure you and I talk about, because we shared the same interest in environmental justice, which we both have incorporated into both, I think, our general environmental practices as well as in our ESG practices, because it really does cross over between the E and the S in ESG. I'm not sure people understand that as much. And so interested in if you could sort of explain what what environmental justice is and where it fits within the ESG structure. And we are going to wind up shortly after this, but if people have questions, please throw them my way now and we'll try to get those in.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, it is environmental justice is one of the hot topics within environmental law over the past 2 years or so. And so, as an environmental lawyer, I've been tracking it very closely. With when President Biden became elected, he made it one of his top priorities for his administration and issued a number of executive orders and made a lot of kind of organizational changes to prioritize that within the entire administration. And so the way it's defined by US EPA is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income. with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And the agency believes that this goal will be achieved when everyone has the same level of protection from environmental and health hazards and equal access to the decision-making process. So as you said, this, by virtue of the definition, it clearly impacts environmental issues as well as social issues because it focuses on people. It centers, people having fair treatment and meaningful involvement, which I think clearly connects the E and the S together.
Yeah. And our goal really here was to make sure that's something that you guys are always thinking about, right? Averil, when people are putting their ESG reports together, think about the communities where you have facilities, think about where you can provide benefit and impact and where people need to have more of a say. And in terms of any best practices in that area, anything you want to share?
Yeah, well, it's there's definitely, if you look at the definition, meaningful involvement, fair treatment, so consultations, ensuring that community stakeholders are engaged, on company initiatives is one of the best practices that I have learned about in looking into this. And in terms of like from an ESG disclosure perspective, I think that we are going to get additional guidance around the best practices as some of these frameworks evolve and mature and how they connect together, these concepts. And particularly with CSRD, while it doesn't mention environmental justice specifically, it does have a lot of connections to affected stakeholders, which include more than just your financial, like your investors, but also other stakeholders. And it requires this double materiality assessment. So I think that companies will start looking at these concepts more and more, and hopefully additional, best practices and guidance will be issued.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all your thoughts. So when you're not counseling one of the biggest players in the airline industry, what do you do for fun?
Sure. Well, I do enjoy to garden. I love gardening and being outside in nature and cooking and travel, and attending my son's basketball games.
Okay. That should keep you pretty busy. So
Yeah.
I love all that. Thank you for your insight, Averil. I love what you've been doing, what United's been doing, and it's always fun to talk to a fellow environmental lawyer that's made this journey as well. So really appreciate your time. Before we leave today, just as a reminder, this webinar was recorded and will be available to view in our library of recordings on Thompson Hine's YouTube channel. We encourage you to visit the channel and subscribe to stay up to date. We want to thank you for attending today's program, and join me next month on February 8th when I chat with the Chief Product Sustainability Officer at Intel. Hope to see you then. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Avril.